Everyone at that table thought I was the failure. Until the butler walked in, looked straight at me and said, "Welcome back, Miss Moreno. The boardroom is ready." I sat quietly at the long oak table in the grand dining hall of the Bellomont estate, where my extended family gathered each spring for our reunion dinner. The flickering candlelight bounced off the antique silverware, but all the warmth in the room seemed to orbit around my older brother Marcus. Dressed like he'd stepped off the cover of a business magazine, Marcus held the room in his usual chokehold of self-congratulation. "So," he announced, swirling his wine, "the CEO cornered me right after the quarterly report, promoted me on the spot, Senior Director of Global Accounts." He waited for the impressed murmurs, and they came right on cue. I lifted my glass of iced tea, ignoring the sting in my stomach. The group had no idea that the biggest executive interviews in Horizon Dynamics history were kicking off tomorrow morning. No idea that I, Danielle Moreno, their supposedly aimless relative, was the founder and CEO of that very company. "So Danielle," my aunt chimed in, her tone painfully cheerful, "still doing that side hustle thing? Crafting, coding? I can't keep up." I smiled. If only she knew my side hustle had just cleared a $90 million 0 cents valuation. "Yep, still hustling," I replied smoothly, thinking about the merger documents on my desk. Marcus leaned over, with faux concern. "Hey, if you're still between things, I could probably pull some strings at Langston Corp. Something entry-level, data input maybe?" He grinned like a hero. Langston Corp., the very company Horizon Dynamics was set to acquire tomorrow at 10 a.m., the same company where Marcus had just landed his fancy new title. "That's really generous of you," I said, holding back a laugh. My father sighed dramatically. "Danielle, you graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. What happened? You're 34. You should be catching up to your brother by now." I just nodded, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass. He didn't know Forbes had just named me one of 2024's 40 under 40 in tech leadership. And tomorrow morning, Marcus would walk into Horizon's headquarters, unaware that the nobody he just offered a pity job to would be waiting on the other side of the table as his new boss. The article had used the exact photo I preferred, back turned to the lens, my face in soft shadow. Few people knew what the elusive founder of Horizon Dynamics actually looked like. That was intentional. I'd built an empire from behind the curtain, and I liked it that way. "Remember when we were kids?" Marcus's voice oozed with that same smug nostalgia he always used when he thought he'd won. "You always said you'd run your own company one day." "Wild, huh?" "Wilder than you know," I thought, folding my napkin in my lap. Aunt Rita, always eager to help in the worst ways, chimed in. "You know, Danielle, I have a friend with a tax prep business. Maybe she could use someone to help with forms, data entry, that sort of thing." "Thanks, Aunt Rita," I said with a polite nod, nudging my untouched creme brulee aside. "But I'm doing just fine." "Fine," Marcus chuckled. "Danielle, you rent a tiny flat, drive a 10-year-old Civic, and you're what, freelancing? Meanwhile, I just wrapped the biggest deal in Langston Corp's history. Tomorrow's going to be a game changer." If only he knew. The deal Marcus was bragging about was actually the final phase of a hostile acquisition. Langston Corp had been bleeding money for 2 years. My team at Horizon had been buying its debt and equity through proxy firms since last spring. Tomorrow wasn't a merger, it was a takeover. The contract he was so proud of? Finalized by his assistant. I'd watched the entire process unfold through anonymous video feeds. Not once did anyone question the silent observer in the background. "That's wonderful, Marcus," I said evenly. "I'm sure tomorrow will be transformative." He raised his glass to himself. "To success. Some of us were just born for it." Our father smiled at him like he'd just cured cancer. "That's my boy. Smart, strategic, a real leader." My phone buzzed, a message from my assistant. "Final list of Langston execs confirmed for interviews. Marcus is first. 9 o'clock IMing sharp." "Excuse me," I said, rising smoothly. I have to take this. My mother sighed. Still taking those late-night customer service shifts? I stepped into the quiet corridor of the Bellamont Country Club. The marble floors echoed under my heels as I checked the message again. Everything was in place, and tomorrow morning, Marcus would sit across from me, interviewing for a job. The executive suite had been prepped, security briefed, and the acquisition paperwork was neatly arranged in leather folders embossed with the Horizon Dynamics logo. I stood near the tall window of my penthouse office, the skyline of Savannah glowing in the early morning haze. Everything was ready. Last night's dinner still lingered in my mind. The polished laughter, Marcus's smug smirks, my parents' subtle jabs. None of them had any idea that the freelancing daughter they pitied would be sitting at the head of the table this morning, not as their sibling, as their superior. Marcus would walk into Horizon's headquarters expecting to discuss his transition during the merger. Instead, he'd walk straight into an executive review. Led by me, I glanced at my watch. 7:42 a.m., just over an hour until he arrived. Back at the Belmont dining room, Marcus had still been playing the hero. "Success is about taking charge," he said as I returned to the table, his voice slicing through the air like a toast. "Some people just don't have the guts for it." "You're absolutely right," I'd replied with a faint smile. "Tomorrow's going to be enlightening." He smirked. "Ah, finally considering that assistant role I mentioned." "Something like that," I said, raising my water glass. "To new beginnings." Driving home later, I'd let the laughter fade behind me, replaced by calm determination. My so-called tiny apartment was actually the penthouse suite of the Orion Residences, Savannah's most exclusive high-rise. The vintage Porsche I parked in the underground garage, paid in full the same week I secured the final stake in Langston Corp. As I reviewed the documents one last time that night, the irony nearly made me laugh. I had built Horizon Dynamics from a borrowed laptop and a rented co-working desk. Now it spanned multiple continents, and today, it would absorb the very company that made my brother feel powerful. The next morning, I stepped into my private elevator, the gold key card clicking smoothly into place. The numbers lit up: 30, 31, 32. Top floor, executive boardroom. I adjusted my blazer in the mirrored walls. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. And the moment Marcus sat across from me, resume in hand, I'd give him exactly what he thought I lacked: power, control, and clarity. Only this time I'd be the one making the offer, if I decided he was worth keeping. I stood in the corner office of Horizon Dynamics headquarters, watching the Savannah skyline bathe in golden morning light. The glass walls reflected someone far removed from the so-called failure my family thought they knew. A woman in a precisely cut steel and Marlowe suit. A woman in control. "Good morning, Ms. Moreno," my assistant Casey said as I stepped out of the elevator. "The Langston Corp executives are waiting in the main conference room. Your brother arrived 15 minutes early." Of course he did. Marcus always had to be first, always had to dominate the room before anyone else arrived. "How many times has he mentioned his new title?" I asked. AC tapped her tablet, barely suppressing a smile. 8 times. Also referenced the Langston-Anderson partnership 4 separate times. I smoothed my blazer, glancing once at my reflection in the brushed steel wall. "And security?" "In place, phones and devices collected, no leaks." "Good," I said, inhaling deeply. "Let's not keep them waiting." The Horizon boardroom wasn't just designed for meetings, it was built for moments like this. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline. Every chair was positioned with intention, the kind of space that made you feel either very big or very small. As we approached, Marcus's voice drifted into the hallway. "And once the merger finalizes, I'm confident I'll have direct oversight of all global accounts. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Horizon offers me a seat on their board." We pushed open the door. Silence hit like a wave. Marcus, halfway through what had to be another one of his humble brags, turned toward the entrance. His confident expression faltered as confusion swept over him. "Danielle?" He blinked. What are you doing here? I stepped forward without missing a beat, placed my briefcase at the head of the table, and met every eye in the room. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the delay. Casey began handing out the acquisition packets. There must be a mistake, Marcus said sharply. This is a confidential strategy session. We're here to meet with Horizon's CEO about the merger. I calmly opened my folder. Correct. I'm Danielle Moreno, founder and CEO of Horizon Dynamics. I let the silence hang for a beat. Now, Marcus, about that merger. If you've enjoyed watching the quiet rise before the reveal, don't forget to subscribe, because the real power play is just beginning. The silence that followed was complete. Marcus had gone ghost pale, his designer suit suddenly looking more like armor cracked in battle. Around the table, the Langston Corp executives flipped through their folders in stunned disbelief. Just yesterday, they'd dismissed me as some underqualified consultant. Now realization was dawning fast, and painfully. This is a joke, Marcus finally said, voice tight. You're just a freelancer. There, its freelancer title, I replied calmly, was a cover, like the penthouse I live in, which happens to sit atop the Archer building, a building owned by Horizon Dynamics. He stared at me as if I'd just rewritten his entire identity. In a way, I had. Success, I continued, stepping toward the monitor, doesn't always need to be shouted at every holiday dinner. Sometimes it speaks for itself. Click. The screen lit up with a timeline, 12 months of strategic acquisitions, dummy corporations, and quietly purchased equity. This isn't a merger, it's an acquisition. Horizon now owns 51% of Langston Corp, all through subsidiary buys completed over the past year. Marcus's expression twisted. Shock gave way to rage. You let me brag last night, while you were planning this behind my back, while I watched you take credit for your assistant's work. While you built your title off your team's labor and charity golf invites, I said, never raising my voice. Several executives exchanged looks. They'd suspected, some had even tried to speak up, but no one challenged Marcus. Until now. As of 9:00 a.m. today, Langston is officially a Horizon subsidiary. Effective immediately, the executive structure will be reviewed. Marcus shot to his feet, knocking his chair back. You can't do this. I'm senior direct. Your position is being eliminated, I interrupted, along with a handful of roles we've identified as non-contributive. However, I turned to the rest of the room. Most operational staff will remain. Horizon rewards results, not resume inflation. What followed was a blur of legal signatures and stunned silence. One by one, the executives left the room, until only Marcus remained. He stood by the window, the city sprawling below him, his shoulders slumped. Why? He whispered. Why didn't you tell me? I gathered my papers with quiet precision. Would you have believed me? He turned, eyes red, voice breaking. Every holiday, every reunion, every time you said you were doing fine, you were building all this? I looked him dead in the eye. Yes. While you were too busy performing success, I was busy earning it. You offered me an entry-level position, I said, snapping my briefcase shut with a quiet, final click. As if you were doing me a favor. I looked Marcus dead in the eye. Consider this a lesson in humility. Success isn't about who brags the loudest at a family gathering. He opened his mouth to respond, but before a word escaped, my phone buzzed. I didn't have to check to know who it was. Mom and Dad lit up the screen like clockwork. His phone had probably started lighting up too, now that security had returned everyone's devices. I answered on speaker. Hello? Danielle? Mom's voice cracked, high and shrill. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you haven't been lying to us all these years. I never lied, I said calmly, adjusting my blazer. You just never asked the right questions. You were too busy applauding Marcus to notice what I was building. But we tried to help, she insisted. We offered to help you find a real job. I was busy building a billion-dollar company, I said simply. I allowed myself a rare smile. Though I'll admit, watching Marcus offer me an entry-level role at a company I was about to acquire, that was pretty entertaining. There was a long silence. Then finally, my father's voice broke through. Lower, slower. Why didn't you ever tell us? I looked over at Marcus, still frozen near the window like a man trying to process the end of a dream. Then back at the phone. Because I wanted this on my own terms, I said. Not for your approval, not to prove a point, just for me. I ended the call. As I reached the door, I turned one last time. Oh, and Marcus, about that job offer last night, you might want to dust off your resume. Feel free to apply through HR. The Knox family reunion? Different. Gone were the jabs about my freelance phase. Instead, second cousins who once avoided me now leaned in when I spoke. People who used to mock me now asked for startup advice. Marcus wasn't there. Word was he'd taken a mid-level job at a regional firm, quietly, humbly. A lesson learned. My parents? They still struggled to reconcile the image of the daughter they overlooked with the CEO everyone suddenly admired. Sometimes they spoke with pride, other times with visible discomfort, especially when asked why they'd never mentioned their daughter ran Horizon Dynamics. As for me, I'd moved into a bigger office, one with my name etched on the building's glass, and on nights I worked late, I could still see my old apartment, tiny, quiet, hidden among the rooftops. A reminder. Success isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one no one noticed until it was too late. And the biggest change wasn't in how they saw me. It was how I saw myself. Because the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you never would be and not needing their applause to know it. Thank you for listening to a story that, for years, I never thought would be heard. I'd love to know your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated, brushed aside, made to feel like your dreams were just too big, too strange, or too far from what others expected of you? I promise, I read every word. Because no matter how far we rise, connection still matters. And if there's one piece of advice I could give you, it's this. You don't owe anyone your story until you're ready to tell it. You don't need to explain your grind to people who only notice noise, not substance. Build in silence, grow in your own time, and when the moment comes to step into the light, you won't need to shout. Your results will speak loud enough. If Danielle's story reminded you of your own strength, I hope you'll subscribe, because I've got more stories to tell, and maybe one of them will help you reclaim your power too. And remember, just because they can't see your worth yet, doesn't mean you're not already becoming something extraordinary.